Good morning, everybody. Afternoon. How's everybody doing today? It's good? Thank you very much for staying sober enough last night to make it out today. I appreciate that. My name's Kirk Evans, and today we're going to talk about client-side rendering in SharePoint Server 2013. Just quick show of hands. Who's had enough of PowerPoint this week? Come on, raise them. You know you have. Good. Because I promise, right after this is the last PowerPoint slide you're going to see for a very long time today. It's all demo. Yeah, there you go. So this is a pretty ambitious talk. I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to start out with kind of talking a little bit about client-side object model and the new OData capabilities. We're going to take a look at this thing called minimal download strategy that's new in SharePoint 2013. You heard a little bit about this during the keynote when they talked about reduction in bandwidth and the reduction in amount of bandwidth that comes down. I'm going to kind of dive into that a little bit and show you how that works. And then as part of the fact that everything is downloaded and rendered on the client, there's a plugin model that you can use called CSR, or client-side rendering, that we'll see how we can override lots of different rendering techniques, such as we'll be able to override how things work with views or even list items or fields. So we're gonna take a look at that, and then we're going to take a pretty good deep dive in micro templating with this new thing called JS Link. And finally, we'll take a quick look at Design Manager to kind of round the whole thing out. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my favorite PowerPoint slide. So let's get started by talking a little bit about this thing, client-side object model. Here I just have a plain SharePoint list on the page. If anybody's wondering what you're looking at, it's just a plain list. I actually just created off the plain list item template. So what we're going to do is we're going to start just kind of tinkering around with this thing, the client-side object model. We're going to look at some of the capabilities of that. But first, before we do, I need to introduce you to something that a lot of developers, quick show of hands, how many people in here are IT pros? I'm showing Visual Studio the whole time, guys. You'll be okay with it, though. It's just all JavaScript. It's the friendlier Visual Studio. So we're going to talk about this thing, client-side object model, and OData. A lot of devs, even IT pros, don't necessarily know what OData is. OData is the capability to download information from a site using basically a RESTful format. That's the easiest way I can start it. So let's build on that a little bit. If we're able to download data or query it with a RESTful format, then we can also do things like update. If everybody remembers kind of back in the day, there was this thing called RSS, really simple syndication. And then there was this kind of war of formats, and this other format emerged. It was called AtomPub. And Atom allowed not only read, which RSS was really designed for read, AtomPub allows not only read, but full CRUD operations. So what OData does is builds on top of that to be able to provide query through the URL. So let's take a look at that for just a moment and see what OData kind of buys us here. And let me open up my favorite tool. I actually got to sit by Marcus Sinovich yesterday and said, thank you for this tool. So I'm going to show off sysinternals, and you go to Zoom It. If anybody is not familiar with this tool, it's a wonderful presentation utility. Say OK. And that lets me do stuff like this. I can zoom in, and you can see the URL now. So what I'll do is we'll go into intranet.contoso.com sites SPC12. At the end of it, I used to, in SharePoint 2010, we introduced this thing called listdata.svc. And that was a service endpoint that was specifically to get list data. But it didn't provide anything outside of just the data in a list. Well, now we have the ability to do things like look at properties of the web. Let me do that. So we look at properties of the web using _API web in the URL right here. Right? So _API web is the part we're looking at. And what that allowed me to do, you can see that I get a bunch of XML goop. Oh man, that doesn't look very useful. Well, let me show you why this is useful, because what's inside it is things like navigation between different entries. Or even as I scroll down, you'll be able to see that there's a little bit more data that we can start to recognize. Things like demos for SharePoint Conference 2012. That's going to be the description. Or the title of the site is SharePoint Conference 2012. So that's kind of cool. I get a bunch of XML goop. What if then I start to do things like I want to select equals title. And now I don't want all that. Oh, wait, one first broken demo. Got to put a query string there. $select equals title. There we go. And what you're seeing now is just by changing the URL, I'm able to query the data in there a little bit. So just by doing $select equals title, I was able to get rid of all the other extraneous stuff and just select a property of a web that I'm looking at. Again, this is using that RESTful API, and it's not just about looking at like one thing about a web. So let's kind of drive into it a little bit, and we'll see under web, we can look at the different lists, and we can navigate between the different lists that are there and see lots of different properties. And this is, for the devs in the room, this is kind of like looking at, when you do _API web/list, this is kind of like looking at the SP list item collection. So this is not actually looking at the list and the items yet. So now let's drive in a little bit deeper. And let's look at maybe the first list. We want to get its items. How about list number 1 instead of 0? How about we get the lists this way? There we go. So now you can get the web, you can get the lists. I can even navigate in to get a specific list. There we are, using, kind of mirroring some of the API properties on the SP list is using things like get by title. So I can use get by title in there and provide the name of a specific list. Oh, and by the way, if anybody's wondering, I wonder if that's the internal name or the display name. This is the display name. So we'll need to take that into account as we're using this API, because if you're putting this in your code and somebody changes the name of the list, your code may not work anymore. So you want to take that into account when using get by name. However, there's other ways that we can navigate to this list as well, such as you'll notice that we have web lists good. So inside the OData, it provides us navigation between entities that we can use to be able to identify. So I can get the same list using its list ID through OData. Well, Kirk, I just came here for client-side rendering. What in the world are you showing me all this XML stuff for? There is relevance. Just bear with me for a moment. So what this is served by is there's this endpoint here, _API. This thing is actually just a redirect to what we actually had in SharePoint 2010, this thing called _VTI_bin client.svc. It's not as much fun to type as just _API. So that's exactly all it is. It's just simply an almost consider it a redirect or an alias for _VTI_bin. So we go at the same endpoint. So I can actually replace that _API_bin client.svc. And thank you. Yeah, in front of a live audience. There you go. Thank you. Crowdsourcing. All right, there we go. So thank you. I appreciate the generous applause. So when you replace the _VTI bin with client and client SVC, you replace all that with _API. It's the same endpoint. You may recognize this endpoint from SharePoint 2010 because this is the same endpoint that's used for the client-side object model. So the client-side object model in SharePoint 2010 is brought forward into SharePoint 2013 and greatly enhanced. One of the big enhancements is also not only the ability to use the same client-side object model that we've had using either JavaScript, ECMAScript, or managed client object model, or that Silverlight thing, being able to use these different models to be able to query data remotely. There's a lot of value in being able to use, not only using JavaScript with typed APIs, but also being able to query through a RESTful endpoint. This makes it much more approachable to developers maybe that aren't as familiar with JavaScript. They can go out and grab a jQuery API, copy and paste that into their code, replace it with the OData endpoint, and you'll be able to get that data. But wait, this is all XML stuff. How are you going to use that with JavaScript? That looks pretty unwieldy. That's a pretty large amount of data. Well, when you send this accepts header inside the request for the OData endpoint, I could say accepts application/JSON, semicolon, OData equals verbose. Whenever I ask with that accepts header, then that changes that the data will be downloaded to me using JSON objects. So there's a little bit of relevance here, why I'm kind of going through introducing first OData, the service endpoint, the fact that underscore API masks the old underscore VTI underscore bin client SVC. Thank you for helping me type that, ladies and gentlemen. And then, so the reason that I'm kind of building this up is that we can actually use this in our APIs to be able to do things. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio 2012. And I've got a project that I was kind of tinkering around with. This is one of the ones that we kind of showed during the Ignite training. And one of the ones I want to show you is this guy right here. He's going to take a moment to communicate with Sharepoint. Thank you for that. The green bar, ladies and gentlemen. Whoever worked on that feature, you get to see it a lot. So we go into here, and one of the exercises that I have is kind of shows exactly the same thing I just did. Remember, there's that underscore API web thing. So there's that underscore API, and all I'm really doing here is issuing the same OData query, but using the jQuery AJAX method. So if you look right here, we're using that URI, using the underscore API, underscore web, and then we use the AJAX method. And again, there's that point that I wanted to bring up, is when you send the headers over using the accept header, and you say application/JSON OData equals verbose, this reduces the payload from being that larger XML payload down into a more compact JavaScript object format that comes over the wire. So pretty easy enough to write a couple lines of JavaScript to be able to query data from a page. So what this demo kind of shows is I have a list called customers that's in this web, and populate it with a little bit of data, and then we'll be able to use the client-side using not just the client-side object model, but using this OData endpoint to be able to query the web to get the lists. So there's my list, and I've even pre-populated with, oh, it didn't pre-populate this, there it is, right here. Pre-populated with some data. So we'll do F5 just to see it work. Here's the first taunting of the demo gods. They were mad at that first slide whenever I said it's all demo. So we'll see how it goes. All right, so in the background, what's happening is I'm actually using the new SharePoint 2013 app model. So I created an app that in the background is going to install a SharePoint hosted app, and then use that using client-side code, client-side again, using JavaScript, using jQuery, the AJAX method, then to call back into the web to be able to retrieve data about the lists that are in it. And it comes in, he says, there's my app redirect. This is a good thing. That means things are nicely working and playing along. Waiting for a reply. And there it is. There it is. Come on, there it is. It's gonna be there in a second, trust me. This demo usually works. Oh, you know what? You know what I'm gonna try is if it's gonna fight me, then we're just going to stop debugging, and we'll just deploy it and come back here in just a moment. Make sure that I've got the right URL. Yeah. Deploy. Oh, you know what that was? That was the JIT. Because it's being used by another process. All right, here we go. The wheels are falling off already. There we go. We'll just close Visual Studio for a second. We'll go back to slides. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so I am going to get this demo to work. This is not going to happen on stage. Last try. CSUM REST Lab. Deploy. Y'all got to tweet first fail. Who won the pool? How long it was going to take me to get the first broken demo? Come on, somebody. Somebody has their hands up. All right, I can change down here, and we'll do SPC 12. And we will deploy. There you go. All right. Publish is being used by somebody else. That means I need to close all these bad boys down. Last try. Come on, mama. Nope, he's going to fail. All right, so what you would have seen is a pretty simplistic demo of JavaScript calling. I'm not even going to fight it anymore because, honestly, it's really not that interesting to me. Because it really doesn't play that much into the rest of what we want to do. This is just kind of setting up client-side stuff, JavaScript, using jQuery to call in a list. You already actually kind of saw it with me showing the OData stuff, so kill off that lab. There we go. So the next thing that I want to kind of show is this thing called the minimal download strategy. So let's go back to our site. And as I navigate through the site, kind of watch this top bar here, the Chrome around it. Notice that the contents of the page are refreshing, but the Chrome itself stays stagnant. And that's actually kind of a feature of this thing called the minimal download strategy. Minimal download strategy, referred to as MDS, is new to SharePoint 2013, and it's actually a feature inside SharePoint 2013. So let's go look at that real quick. Go here to Site Settings, and I'll go to Site Features. Scroll down a little bit, and you can see there it is, Minimal Download Strategy. I'm not going to turn it off yet. I am going to do that in a moment to kind of show you the difference. But we want to inspect what's actually going on here a little bit. So let's start with, if anybody's played with SharePoint 2013 already, you might have noticed this kind of odd-looking URL thing going on up here. The 15 start.aspx with a pound sign, and then the rest of our URL. So there's actually a couple things going on. In this page, start.aspx, he includes a control internally that's called the async delta manager. And this guy is responsible for looking at finding the pound sign inside the URL, using that to be able to navigate to what page should be rendered, but also parsing any of the delta data that is sent back and forth over the wire. So as it parses this delta data, that means it kind of changes the payload. You would kind of imagine that we're not sending entire HTML documents down, we're sending parts of documents down. So we need something to figure out where to put those parts inside the page. So we'll open up Fiddler, kind of take a look. That's the wrong tool. This is Fiddler right here. We're going to just stick that over here to the side for a moment. Cancel. Thank you. Go back to the browser, and that way we can kind of see some of the requests that are going on. This is the wrong one, so we'll go to intranet, katosa.com, sites, SPC 12. There we go. So you can see some things are starting to light up, but not a whole lot, because one of the things that you just saw is that some of this information is already in my cache. So since it's already in the cache, then I didn't get nearly the number of requests that I would have thought. So pretty easy enough. We'll just go back here and say that we want to clear the cache. It's going to take a moment. I'm going to make it delete cookies and everything. And then I'll clear everything, remove all, and then we'll put it back to see what's the difference this time. Yeah, that looks more like what I expected. All right, so what? It's still going. So what happened behind the scenes was I had some of it cached, and you see that I had a pretty light footprint of data. So now let me just remove all of these really quick. And that's just clearing out the list that's there. And now I'll just navigate to another page, and a lot less data again. A lot less stuff is sent over the wire. So everybody's thinking, yeah, that's just a function of the web, Kirk. That's just having client-side cache. Well, yeah, that's true. But let me kind of show you what's in this request. So you might notice on the URL that we have at sites SPC12, my wiki page. When I clicked on that, there's this append Ajax delta equals 1. So what that's kind of letting me know is that as I make these navigational points between pages, that it's not downloading the entire thing. It's actually telling the minimal download strategy that it doesn't need all of the data. It means just get a little bit of it. So let's go back and look at what that looks like in the raw. And I'm going to view a notepad just so you can kind of see this. There's a couple parts that we want to point out. The first thing we want to kind of show out is, let's see, where is the guy? Right here. All right, the first part because see that truncation? That's the part I was missing. I need to do that. Decode it. Now I need to view it in Notepad. That's what I was looking for. All right. So we'll inspect the request. We see, by the way, can everybody see this okay in the cheap seats? You're good? All right. Thank you for coming. All right, so we get the 200 OK HTTP, and we kind of walk through some of the stuff that we have here. And there's this marker here called delta boundary. And the delta boundary is letting me know this is the token for the data that's going to be replaced. And you'll see where this shows up here in just a moment. So we'll scroll down a little bit. Notice no HTML, head, all that script, none of that stuff. We just kind of start right off at meta, link, and then this kind of weird delta boundary thing. And that's the same number, the same code that we saw up top. So the delta boundary is kind of letting SharePoint and letting the async delta manager know here's where the data you're going to get is going to be placed inside the page. So this data is going to be used, parsed, and stuffed inside the actual master page, inside the page request itself. So that's a little very brief summary of the minimal download strategy. But you know what? We need to do a little bit more, because we need to kind of understand this a little bit more. So let's go back and look at the browser. I promise, let's turn it off. And we'll go to not this one. This one. Go to site settings, and we'll go to features. And now I'm going to turn minimal download strategy off. Deactivate. Yes, I really want to deactivate this feature. And what that did was by turning off the minimal download strategy, a couple things happened. One, you'll notice that the URL kind of changed here. Right up here. We don't see that start.aspx gobbledygook anymore. Right now what it's saying is, no, here's the actual page. And if we inspect the page rendering now, we're not going to see the delta boundary stuff anymore. We're going to see the pages actually rendered through the fiddler request. So that's kind of one change. Another change that you'll see is as I go to lists, let's go to that wins list, casino images. There's a good one. Casinos. There we go. So you'll see that we still get some of the new SharePoint 2013 capabilities, some of the client-side rendering. So the minimal download strategy is somewhat orthogonal to the client-side rendering. So just turning the minimal download strategy off doesn't actually turn off this next thing that I want to start talking about, client-side rendering. Is that right, John? Said it right? All right, he says yes. John is from the product team. He's one of the guys that actually wrote this, so I've been working with him this week, making sure that I'm saying all this right. All right, so as we look, it doesn't actually turn off the client-side rendering capabilities. So now let's start diving into that part. So as we start looking at the ability for us to mess around with the rendering, you know what? Let me explain what I meant by mess around with rendering a little bit. Quick show of hands, who loves XSLT? Yeah, it pays the bills, doesn't it? Yeah. And the reason I kind of joke about that is for a lot of people, they don't raise their hands very quickly, other than it makes nice checks. Because the fact is that it's difficult to do if it's not something you do on a regular basis. So using XSLT to customize views can be tedious for a lot of folks that they don't have their heads in that day in, day out. If it's one of those skills that you have to break out once every 6 months, you find yourself searching for blog posts about how to do even somewhat trivial tasks. So introducing this new capability of client-side rendering where you can control the rendering and plug into the pipeline. So I want to kind of set up what I'm about to show. First, I have a list of just images. And they're just pictures of casinos. Pretty easy enough, casino images. And as I kind of hover over, you see that I get this kind of just animation part. So let's go back and turn minimal download strategy back on, site settings, and we'll go to site features, turn minimal download strategy back on, activate, Wonder Twin Powers. All right, we're on. Now let's go back to the site itself. Come on, go up. Go back up here to the site. And now let's go back to the images. And let's look for Control F, animations. So if anybody didn't ever know this trick, behind the scenes, there's already some semblance of some of the client-side rendering. There's actually an animation class behind the scenes that provides animations that you can take advantage of. A quick demo to show that this exists is as I hover over, notice how I just kind of fly and we get this rigid effect of just, it's either on or it's off. It's kind of binary. Well, if I do that trick again just by searching for animations and then I can click turn on animations, now notice that we get a smooth effect. That's actually on by default. I had turned it off. So one of the things that you get under the covers with this client-side rendering capability is the ability to use animations, and there's it's SP animation behind the scenes to be able to utilize that client side. I got to tell you though, I'm really not that good at a graphics guy. You're going to see that in a moment. So I'm not going to bore you with my minimal animation skills. What I'm going to do is kind of dive a little bit deeper into what are the capabilities of this client-side rendering. So let's go back to, I've got another, so this is just the images so far. Then I've got another list called casinos. This one's pretty simple. All it is just the title, is the name of it, like Mandalay Bay, and then I just yanked some descriptive text off the web somewhere, pirated that, and then an image of it, and then the location. And we're going to discuss this in detail in just a little bit. So I have the title, description, image, location, and this image is just a lookup to the images that I showed you before. And now I have this list of wins. Where have I been a winner when I've been in Vegas? Looks kind of a weird list though. As we have a winner, win at SPC, slow but sure. Let's kind of mess around with that for a little bit. So let's edit the page. And we'll edit the web part. And now we'll go into miscellaneous. If we scroll down here, you'll be able to see that there's this property called JSLink. And under JSLink, what you can do is point it to a JavaScript file that's sitting either in the site collection or sitting in underscore layouts. See, if you put it into the site collection, then that makes it available to use with Office 365. That means that you can now easily control the rendering of the things that I'm going to show you today using Office 365, same approaches that I'm doing. I put everything in the underscore layouts because my solution is on-premise, and that's going to reduce the number of round trips back to the content database. So I chose to put things in underscore layouts. And by applying this template, it's that guy that was responsible for changing the layout of the page. See, it's just a normal list view. So all I really did was I applied some JavaScript to this list view, and it completely changed the rendering of the page. So let's go back and look at what was that JavaScript that I wrote that made it do that. I'm going to pop this guy open. I've got a couple of rendering templates we're going to start with. The first one is just a really simple one that I just demoed. It just takes the title of the item and makes it bold. And it's actually pretty simple JavaScript to plug into. So let's go back here, and we'll look at the rendering templates. Right. Under underscore layouts, I have this thing, my render item, and that's the one I just showed you a moment ago. Very simplistic code. I have an immediate execution function up top, that function open paren, and then that says immediately start executing, where I have a global override CTX equals open squiggly, close squiggly. That's the technical name for those, by the way. They're squigglies, not braces. So the open squiggly, close squiggly just means object. Create a new object. And then from there we start setting some properties of this object. Global override CTX.templates equals object. And then we say .templates item equals my render item. So what we're saying here is override the item rendering with my object. With my function, my function called myRenderItem. This guy right here is going to call this guy right here, but it doesn't call it right now. It's going to call it whenever the page is rendered right here. So we register our template overrides. Am I drawing enough on the screen? Here, there's a couple more for you too. So we're going to register our template overrides, providing our object, and our object is going to provide the callback. So when the list is rendered, then it's going to call our rendering function here. Well, all we're really going to do is we're going to create a new array, push a div and a b onto the stack, and then we're going to push in, say, the current items.title. There's the client-side object model I was talking about before. There's the one that the Visual Studio was locking up on the manifest file, and I decided to say skip it. So this is kind of the same thing as using the client-side object model, using context current item.title, and then we push the off tags for those elements, and then return join on an empty string, which means return all of the elements in the array as a string. It's just a really kind of neat trick of formatting HTML and sending it off. So let's go back and apply this again to the list to see what just happened. We'll go back to our wins page. Again, not this one, this one. Edit the page. And this time we'll go back and edit the web part. Go to miscellaneous, scroll down. And under JS link, this is where you'll provide myRenderItem.js. The name here is not significant. The path is significant. There we go. So we just immediately just changed the rendering that quickly with a couple lines of JavaScript to be able to control the rendering of the items in this view. Yeah, boring demo, I know. Let's make it a little better. So let's go back and look at another template that I have. I have one called render money. This one does a little bit more. So I have an immediate function again. This guy is going to set up the templates object just like I did before. Global override templates. I'm going to override the item rendering, and it's going to call myRenderItem function. And then we're going to register the template overrides with the template manager, providing that object. When the list items are rendered, myRenderItem function will be called. And now I've got a couple of things going on. Notice this statement right here. I wanted to show you this before it happened so nobody started tweeting, oh, he's already getting Visual Studio errors. This will happen. I am going to get a Visual Studio pop-up that says you want to start debugging. Because I'm doing it on purpose, I put the word debugger in here. This is a great little trick as you're working with client-side rendering and using the templates. Use the word debugger inside your template, and that'll pop up in Visual Studio for you, let you step through the JavaScript. We'll demonstrate that in a moment. Next, I can set up a variable here, quantity. And I just look in the current context, I look at the current item, and I just ask it for the quantity field. Next, this is why I started out with that OData stuff. Because what I'm going to do is use the same demo that I did a moment ago where I used the underscore API / web / list get by title casinos. And I'm going to ask it for that casinos list, and I'm going to filter with a couple of other things. I'm going to filter where the title equals the current item casino. So we're not just doing simple filtering here, because we're using JavaScript, now we can actually call out and start to do other things outside of our context. See, when you tried that with XSLT, that started to introduce some slightly more advanced techniques. So with JavaScript, it actually makes it really approachable and simple to be able to leverage the skills of your JavaScript developers inside your organization. Now here, I'm going to go old school. This is the throwback bit of code. I just like writing this one just because. I didn't want to do jQuery. I didn't want to do any of that stuff or Ajax. I just wanted old XML, HTTP. Just bring it back. All we're going to do is issue a GET request. And one of the things that we're going to add in here is the accept header. And I talked about that before. This is an important part of being able to query from JavaScript to an OData endpoint so that you're not getting XML back. This is the guy that's going to tell it, get JavaScript object notation back, a much tighter, compact format. It's easy to parse inside JavaScript. So I set the accept header, and now I should be able to scroll down a little bit. After we call send, you see here's some just ill-formatted code. Yes, I am a somewhat sloppy JavaScript developer at times. Because what we're going to do here is after we call send, we're going to use the eval to be able to parse out the response text. I know if anybody's about to call me out for this not a good practice, I know. I just want to do some throwback code to try to demonstrate that you could use the old skills or it could use some of the new stuff as well. So we're going to use eval on the response text to be able to get that as an object. And then from there, we'll be able to navigate down in. Now, if you've never worked with our JSON APIs that we emit, it's always wrapped with an outer D. And the reason why is because if it wasn't, then that eval is potentially really dangerous, because I could have emitted JavaScript that has function callbacks that are immediately executed. So having that D actually prevents a suite of attacks on being able to emit JavaScript that would cause behavior. By wrapping it with a D, it's simply just data. So to wrap it with a D, that means you have to dereference the .d and then get the results. And here what I'm doing is just looking for the first result that's in the list. And then I can easily access the .image and even .url property of it. Next thing I want to show is how we kind of go through here. What I'm doing is looking at the current item, and I'm saying if the quantity, if I won less than $100, turn the background red so I can pretty quickly see that this is a casino I'm not winning a whole lot at. I can also do things like I can change the size of the image that I'm about to render. So I can say the size is quantity divided by 2 to say if I won 200, then I want the height and width, that's what you're kind of seeing here, I want the height and width to adjust for an image that I'm going to show. Now, one of the other things that I'm kind of showing here is I get the image URL and casino. Now let me, before I go back and set this on that JS link, I want to remind you what it actually looks like in the browser. So where we're at right now is this. right? We just have this text. Let's go back and remove that so you can see the JS link here. Oh, that's not what I meant. That's what I meant. We'll say OK. And now my JS link is removed. So now let's change this again. Now let's go back and edit the web part. Go to, scroll down. This time it's rendering templates, render money.js. Now again, what you're looking at in the page, the only things that are there are the title, an amount, and the casino. That's the only things that are in this list. But by using JavaScript, on purpose, this is on purpose, I wanted to make sure everybody knew that ahead of time. By using JavaScript, I'm going to be able to control the rendering of all the items that appear in the list. Now, if you remember when I registered this, when I registered it, I told it I'm going to override the item rendering. So what's going to happen is for every single item, I'm going to get prompted to be able to debug. That's why there's only basically 3 items in this list. Let's pop this guy open. Visual Studio. There's my debugger statement. How easy is that? You need to remember that trick. Put debugger semicolon in your scripts. Now I can step through and look at things like what's the current item's quantity. And I can even hover over and I can see that if I look at text visualizer, I can see the current item's quantity is 150. All right, that's good. The demo gods are working along. That means that I can actually see the data that was returned in the current item. Next is we want to set that URL. I want to look at the page context info web absolute URL property. And you can kind of see that guy here under text visualizer. As I scroll in, it's intranet.contoso.com, sites SPC12, all over. Yeah, there you go. Close. Next thing we're going to ask is we're going to start up the new XML HTTP object. We're going to scroll down a bit. And we're going to even set a breakpoint way down here just to show you could do that too. We're going to look at what's the string so far. Now, I don't want to do that. I'll just kind of set it all the way down here, set a breakpoint so I can see the entire thing, F5. And now I can look at string, and I can look at it as an HTML visualizer. And this is kind of what's going to be rendered whenever the page is rendered. So I was able to take data and make it completely different looking just by using JavaScript. And I'm able to use JavaScript functions to be able to call out somewhere else to go get the data and augment stuff that wasn't even in this list to begin with. So let me close and just hit F5. You're going to see the prompt again. We're back at debugger because we're at the second item in the list. I'm just going to hit F5, F5, F5. And where are we at in the browser? We are at the ugliest web page ever created. But it demonstrates it really nicely. We're able to take I did that little bold trick for the number. I was able to take the coins, and the coins are slightly bigger or smaller depending on how much money I won. There's a picture of the MGM Grand that came from somewhere in a different list without me having to actually change this list to include a lookup to the list picture itself, so I didn't have to change the structure of the list to support this. And as I scroll down further, there's even that red thing that says, yep, only $1.99 at the Venetian. So I can see that it highlights in red. Hopefully this starts to illustrate there's some huge possibilities using this JS link to be able to just control item rendering. Now let's take it another step, because it's not just about items. In fact, this JS link, you can apply at more than just a single item level. There's a whole bunch of different stuff you can do here, such as, what if, and I'm going to stop debugging here. What if I want to create maybe my own content type? And in my content type, I'd like to be able to define, here's my content type, here's a bunch of fields that are in it, title, quantity, casino, drinks, looks kind of just like the list you just saw a moment ago. Well, let's go in and see that, yep, I could do the same JS link, put it on a field that's in a content type, and now all of the different lists that I apply this content type to, the JS link rendering travels with it. So that opens up for developers is not just about opening up the web part and manually editing it. No, now you can start to build solutions that control the rendering of not only the items that are in a content type, and by the way, it's just an out-of-box content type, the text content type. So you can override on the field level to be able to control what the rendering of that field will look like. So let's kind of look at what this script looks for. And I have to admit, the script I'm about to show is not my own code. This is a guy named David Mann that wrote a really great sample, and he even admitted that he worked a lot with Andrew Connell when he was writing it. This was a last-minute addition, but it's such a stellar example of that. I didn't have time to ask David for permission up front, so I'm going to publicly ask him for forgiveness. But this is such a great demo. I want to kind of walk through the code that he wrote because it really shows this off. So if I go into _layouts, have this thing render drinks. So while I was at the casino and trying to earn money, I also want to see how many drinks did I have. So I need a bigger drop down. We have a couple of functions here. First one is I want to use this function, again, an immediate function that will be called, that does the init field types. And I'll talk about what that is in just a moment. And then I'm going to set up a new JS field text. And that field text is saying it's just a text field, and the name of it is drinks. And when it's rendered, now you can control not only the rendering of an item, but also its different forms. So I can say when it's being displayed, when it's being edited. How about when it's being edited, viewed, displayed. So let's kind of scroll down a little bit. And what we're going to do is, if the value that's being displayed is ONE, we're going to change it to a numeric value behind the scenes. So that's kind of one way that we can change these things. Another way that we can change it is we could change it to a link, right? In our view function here, we could change it to a link and say, click here to be able to see the show field value. So whenever I click the word show field value, this JavaScript alert will pop up. Another thing is when it's edited, I can completely change. So I don't want to have customers actually typing in ONE. I don't even want to have to make them understand if it's a word or a number. I'd like for them to be able to see a drop down. So this guy right here, this var options is get options from simulated web service call. I just showed you a demonstration of a real service call that goes out to using the XML HTTP. Here, I'll show you it's simulated. It's just hard coding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we're doing is we're changing the presentation of the data. Instead of being a number or a string, we're changing it to a drop down on the fly, just by changing the JS link. Scroll down a little bit more. Some other things we can do are, if we can even do custom validation. Now I don't want to show you that real quick. I just want to run it and see how it looks. So that is render drinks. So what I'll do is stop editing this list. Debugger. Why is that happening? That's happening because I have the debugger statement sitting in there. I'm going to see this 3 times. 1, 2, 3. There you go. And that's for every item that's sitting in the list. So now let's go back and edit. Now, as a fair warning, you're about to see the debugger a couple more times, so I'm going to edit the page. When I edit the page, I'm going to see the debugger again. 1, 2, 3. And now as I go back up here to edit the web part, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Now I go down to miscellaneous, and I'm going to replace this guy with render drinks.js. Nothing happened. Nothing interesting. The reason why is because this list doesn't actually have that content type applied to it yet. So I should be able to go up here to page, say stop editing. And I'm going to go up and trying to change this list a little bit. So we'll go to list settings. And under list settings, I'm going to change the content type. So to do that, you have to go into advanced settings, allow management of content types, yes. We say okay. Now we scroll down to the content types and we can see that there's a couple of content types already applied. This is just based on the announcement content type, and then I extended it with a couple of additional fields like the casino. But now let's add in another existing site content type, and that'll be under custom content types. Wins with drinks was my content type that I applied. I'll say okay. How many wins did I get where there were also drinks involved? So this time I'll go back to my wins. And it doesn't show up on the view because I haven't added a view yet. So let's create a view, and I'll start with the all items view, and I'll add in drinks. And this is wins with drinks. And say okay. Now I can see the drinks column is sitting here, so let's go edit this guy real quick and do edit item. You can see that, remember, what's being stored behind the scenes is actually just a number. But we're going to change it on the fly for a couple of different presentations. Right now the presentation that you're seeing is a drop down. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. I need to change this, wins with drinks, to that content type. Now there's the drinks. There's the drop down I meant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I was like, how do we change numbers to casinos? That was odd. No, actually what we're storing behind the scenes is numbers, but we're using the JS link to present it as a drop down. So let's choose 1, and at the Mandalay Bay, it was Pete's fault. Playing blackjack, I had $1 with 2 drinks. No, 3 drinks. 4 drinks. 4 is right out. Counteth thou to 3, loveth thou a holy hand grenade of Antioch. Wait for it, wait for it. There's one more part to it. You ready? You click OK. It's back to 3. So credit to David Mann for the demo on this so far. He did a great job. Fantastic job. So let's keep going because there's more to this. Because you remember, one presentation of it was a drop down. Another presentation of it, so we'll save. Another presentation of it was this show field value link. So I click that. Because I didn't just edit that one. It's this one that I edited. Yep. This one has a value of, and now it changed it from a number to text. So I can see, so we can start to dynamically control the rendering, not only of the list views, but now items or fields that are applied in different views, in different forms. So let's keep going because there's still more to see here. So we'll go back here and do, what does it look like when I go to view item? There, now it's a number. So we went a drop down, we had a link, we had text, we had a pop-up, all from just changing the different forms that we're interacting with. This is a hugely powerful capability using JS Link, being able to tie it to maybe our own fields, deploying it in a content type. Now for the devs in the room, let's go even one step further. Let's see how you can really take advantage of this in a custom solution. I'm going to open a recent project and solution here that I had that was called a custom geolocation field. And this guy's interesting because behind the scenes what I'm doing is there's an out-of-box type called SP field geolocation. And this guy provides latitude and longitude capabilities to be able to add that in as a field inside your list. The problem to me is that when you're entering the data, the format that it wants you to store it, and we're going to see that format in just a second. It's the word point with an open paren, and then the latitude, and then the longitude, and a closed paren. Real friendly to type. So we're going to make that a little bit friendlier for our users. Now, the web part, or the field control itself, is actually pretty simple. There's a field, and then I create a class that derives from it. And then the only thing I'm really doing here is overriding, JS link. And by doing that, I'm pointing it to, here's where it's sitting on disk, this custom geolocation field in layouts, custom geolocation field, custom geolocation control.js. Let's pop this guy open a little bit. So we pop this guy open. He's a little more complex than what we've been working with so far, because this guy is doing kind of the same trick that I was showing before as we change the rendering as we switch between forms. This guy is going to control the rendering between the edit mode and also be able to parse the data behind the scenes, that point, latitude, longitude, and change it to 2 different text boxes, making it a lot easier for users to type in. And you can kind of see what we're doing right here is whenever we parse out the data, we get the field value. And then from the field value, we just grab what is the latitude and what's the longitude and grab the value. And then we're going to write it out into the result. Kind of the same way we were just doing a moment ago. We grab some data and then we render it out with whatever presentation that we want, depending on the current context. As we scroll down a little bit, some other things you can see here are, wrong one. How'd that happen? We're back. So, wrong button. So we go into field value.match, and there's a regular expression that's looking for, there's that word point. We're looking for point, open paren, looking for some numbers so we can figure out what's the data that's sitting inside here. Because we don't want our users to have to type point, open paren with some numbers. That's kind of not friendly. So what we'll do is we'll actually look for the matches, look for the latitude, longitude, altitude, and measure, stuff those into our array. And then the next thing that we'll do is we'll look for some more data and look for the longitude and latitude here if there weren't matches up here. So if there aren't any matches, then go down here and parse just the latitude, longitude out. Scroll down a little bit. You can see that I'm looking for some more data. I'm going to render. You know what? Instead of me walking through the JavaScript, let's just see it run. So I'll do that. I'm going to deploy. You know what? I'm not going to deploy. I was smart enough not to suffer the recycling the app pool tax here. So I've already deployed it. You don't need a demo of that, hopefully. So we'll go back to our web page, and we'll just see what's going on. Back button usually works. There we go. So we go to casinos. To go into casinos, notice that the presentation of that is not point, open paren, close paren. It's actually 2 different lines of text. The latitude separated by the longitude, even with a semicolon in the middle. So the user can easily see which one's lat, which one's long, and be able to read this and be able to understand which one's lat and long. So let's go edit this item. And now you can see the presentation that we've changed. Again, this is by using a custom field control and attaching the JS link to the field control and deploying it. And our users then get to use the field control inside any lists that they use that field. Or, just like I just showed, a content type could be deployed that uses my field, that attaches a JS link. There's a lot of possibilities for reusing this over and over. But the real win here is that the user doesn't have to understand that point, open paren, close paren stuff. Another really cool thing about using this geolocation trick is as your users start to type in these values, the lat and the long, there's also another really neat capability here. If I go into, let's clear the screen here. Let's go in here and say set sp. There's actually a new PowerShell commandlet, set-sp Bing Maps key. And what you can do is actually go out and apply your Bing Map key to either your SharePoint farm or a site in the farm, so that as you do this next thing that I'm about to show you, that as you're using these geolocation fields, that we can actually render the Bing map according to the data in there. So let's go back to casinos. So we're back at casinos really quick. And this is just the kind of regular list view. Let's add in a new view. Let's create a view. And this time we'll choose the map view. And I'll call it Woo-Ha Demo, just because it's really cool looking. And we want to make sure that we've added in all the data that we need here. So I've got the description, image, and location. That's fine. And we'll say OK. Now what you're seeing is the data that was presented, the data that was in that, bless you, there's nothing to sneeze at, this is good stuff. You see the list on the left that has not only the title from the list, the description, but also that there was an image in it, and a slightly slow internet connection is going to eventually render this map over here, the Bing Maps control. Good. At least you get to see the text that says it is a Bing Maps control. And in just a moment, it's going to start rendering, and you'll actually see the push pins for each one of the items in the list rendered on a Bing's map. And I'm not going to suffer the internet connection. I am going to keep going. Trust me, you would see push pins. Oh, what do you want? You want to give it another second? Nope, they want to keep going. It would be a map. All right. So next kind of thing I want to kind of double back on is there's a couple of other things that I didn't kind of get to. I wanted to make sure that we had time. We've got about 10 minutes left. So the things I've shown you so far, I showed you really quick how to just add in a JavaScript to control the list view. I showed you then how to maybe deploy it in a content type. Showed you how to attach it to a field and then have that field then travel along with different content types, or even how to control things in different forms for their being viewed. So let's go back and look at a couple more things for how does this actually work behind the scenes. So let's go back to the wins. And I'm going to edit the page. On the page, I'll go back and set JS link to something. Edit the web part. Let's go down here to miscellaneous. See how we have that rendering template? I'm going to, instead of doing that, I'm going to do this other checkbox right here. This guy is called server render. And by using server render, what it's saying is don't render on the client, render on the server. And the reasons that you might want to control this, maybe there's a search crawler that's coming out and hitting your web part. That would be one kind of use for that, where you want to make sure that the contents are rendered on the server, not asynchronously on the client. So we'll kind of knock this guy out, and let's look at the difference here. Say OK. And then we'll stop editing. And now the differences to this. You might notice that there's been a couple changes to the UI. Let's see. First, the ... is gone. There's a technical name for that. I'm not sure what the ... is actually called, but the ellipsis. The ellipsis usually is about right here, but it's not there. Instead, what we get is our friendly old ECB menu kind of hovering over here. So by using server render, we can already kind of see some differences in the behavior of the page. All right, so now let's kind of go back over here. Another thing that you'll notice, where's start.aspx? That guy's not in there either. So let's go over here to my wiki page. Yep, start.aspx is there on other pages, but it's not there whenever I click the server render. So some other things that we want to kind of point out really quick is make sure that everybody understands is that we have the ability to use JSLink to override. We have the ability to control things through different forms and fields. Last thing that I want to make sure that everybody kind of understands is this new thing called the Display Manager. You saw a very quick demo of this in the keynote. And the Display Manager is actually a really powerful capability for you to use any HTML editor that you want to be able to create master pages and page layouts. So I'll go to my search site. On my search site, I will go back here to Site Settings, and I'll go to Master Pages and Page Layouts. Inside there, you'll see a folder called Display Templates. Drive into Display Templates. You'll see one called Search. So we'll drive into Search. You can see there's a whole bunch of things in here, but the pattern is HTML, JS. And for each one of these, there's HTML, JS, HTML, JS, HTML, JS. So what we're going to do is kind of look at what would it take to create one of these HTML things. Do I have to code the JS myself? And the quick answer is no, you don't. So I'm going to open up one that I've already got here called defaultglossary.html. And the way that I created this was I just grabbed one of the default item.html, downloaded a copy, and then started making my own edits to it. So all this stuff up top, you don't really touch. Maybe you want to change the title, but the rest of this stuff you really don't want to touch. Just leave it. Next thing is, all I really did was use the templating language to be able to do things like add in a product and look at the current context. And it uses this templating syntax, underscore pound equals pound underscore. So that's how we delimit the text. So as you have these text templates in your HTML, you can actually insert the templating inside for substitute values inside the HTML. So you would do this in, remember Dreamweaver? So the Dreamweaver joke. So you can actually do this in Dreamweaver, edit the page, and then insert these templating values inside the page. Another kind of neat trick here, though, is while you're doing this, you might want to also leverage the same trick that I introduced before, because as you're debugging these things, you're going to want to be able to easily control the rendering of it and see exactly what's happening behind the scenes. So let's do File Save. And now I'm going to open up all the master pages, and I want to upload one. Files, that's it. Files. I want to upload one. We'll go back to the desktop, and I've got one called defaultglossary.html. I'll say OK. And you can see where it's even telling me I'm about to put this in display templates /search. That's OK. So I'm going to have a display template that's going to control the rendering of search items as well. And it asks me some things about what's the content type. Is it a design file, master page? Is it a document? So I'll go here and say that it is a design file. And that lets me choose a couple of other things, like what's the title, stuff like that. So as I go back here, if I look at the default glossary, one of the ones that I already did, you'll see that since I just hit cancel really quick, it said, well, I'm going to wipe out the JavaScript back there, and I'm going to actually just leave it as an HTML file right now. So let's go into the Design Manager. Site Settings. Where is Design Manager? Oh, I'm going to back up. I'm going to try the demo one more time. I'm going to brave it and upload it. Upload a document. We're going to browse, look for default glossary, HTML, open, and we'll say OK. Now this guy is a display template code. Scroll down. Target content type is the content type. We'll say you can control template level, all kinds of neat stuff. We'll say save. Because the part that I'm really interested in showing is what happens behind the scenes is the HTML that I just wrote gets processed. There's a file notification watcher behind the scenes that should convert it and create a corresponding .js file for it. So you can see where that's happened with other items. Whereas you drop in the .html, the .js is associated with it as well. So what happens behind the scenes is as you create these display templates, then the HTML, all those placeholders that we created are converted to JavaScript behind the scenes. Then as you do the search result, as you do the search and it used one of your display templates, then it'll be rendered using client-side rendering and using the same techniques that I've been introducing to you throughout the morning. So that was a whole bunch of code and a whole bunch of not PowerPoint. So let me wrap up really quick. So in summary, I showed you a whole bunch of stuff. Client-side object model, the minimal download strategy, client-side rendering. I introduced JS Link a couple of different ways. And we also took a look at Design Manager. There's been a couple of other sessions that introduced client-side rendering. John Campbell, thank you very much for coming. He's right here. As well as Raymond Mitchell and Wes Hackett are doing a session later today that talks a little bit more about client-side rendering as well. My name's Kirk Evans at Twitter. I'm K.A. Evans. Please remember to submit feedback. We accept the high scores only. And with that, please visit my SPC. Thank you and enjoy Vegas.